A millionaire CEO dumped his wife under pressure from his elite parents. 5 years later, she showed up with twin sons who looked exactly like him. Lucas Rivers was a man the world admired. At 32, he was already the CEO of Rivers Tech, a multi-billion-dollar tech empire built on artificial intelligence and cloud innovation. He graced magazine covers, gave keynotes at world summits, and shook hands with presidents. Every photo of him showed the same pristine image, golden blonde hair styled perfectly, piercing blue eyes that held just the right amount of cool detachment, and the kind of smile that could close deals before a contract was even read. He lived in a penthouse above Central Park, drove a custom electric sports car, and wore tailored suits worth more than most people's rent. To everyone looking in from the outside, he was flawless, driven, disciplined, and destined for greatness. But there was one thing that Lucas didn't have, and had once almost risked everything for: love. 5 years earlier, before he stepped into his full role as CEO, Lucas had been with someone who didn't fit the blueprint his family had laid out for his life. Her name was Amber Wallace. She wasn't a socialite or a tech investor. She wasn't born into money. She was a graduate student, studying architecture on scholarships and side jobs, with paint on her jeans and notebooks full of messy sketches. She had long brown hair, expressive blue eyes, and a way of looking at Lucas that made him feel like he was more than his title. With her, he didn't have to perform. With her, he laughed louder, slept better, dreamed more freely. They met at a charity event he had only attended out of obligation. She was there helping set up the stage lights, and he bumped into her while checking his phone. It was the most human moment he'd had in months. Their relationship bloomed in private. Long walks through the city. Takeout on rooftops. Late-night conversations about dreams and fears. She didn't care about his money. She teased him about his expensive watch and refused to let him pay her rent. She made him feel real in a world where everything about him felt curated. For the first time in his life, he imagined a future that didn't revolve around quarterly earnings or board meetings. He imagined a small wedding, a cozy home, kids with blue eyes and wild energy. He imagined Amber in every version of that future. But his parents had other plans. When they found out about Amber, the reaction was immediate and brutal. His father, Charles Rivers, the chairman of the board and one of the coldest men Lucas had ever known, summoned him into his office and laid it out plainly: she is not your equal. She dilutes your image. Marry her, and we'll begin the process of removing you from succession. His mother didn't bother hiding her disdain either. Do you really want to embarrass the family? She asked. What will shareholders think when they see you with someone so average? Lucas tried to resist. He fought. He told them he didn't care about perception. But Rivers Tech wasn't just a company. It was an empire, passed down from 3 generations. His name was a brand. His face was an investment. And as the pressure mounted, from family, from the board, from advisors reminding him of his obligations, Lucas felt the walls close in. The worst part? He never even told Amber the truth. One day, he simply ended it. No explanation. No fight. He said he needed to focus on his career and walked out of her apartment, leaving behind the woman he had imagined forever with. Amber called once. Then twice. Then she stopped. He never answered. He buried himself in work and tried to convince himself it had been necessary. That it was for the best. But there wasn't a single day that passed when he didn't think about her, when he didn't see something that reminded him of the life he'd left behind. He missed her laugh. The way she said his name when she was mad. The way she made him feel like a man, not a product. Still, he never reached out. Because to admit he was wrong would mean facing everything he gave up. And at that time, Lucas Rivers didn't know how to face regret. Not yet. Amber Wallace had never believed in fairy tales, but falling in love with Lucas Rivers had felt dangerously close to one. For a brief time, it had been more than she ever dreamed possible. She remembered the warmth in his eyes when he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. She remembered the rooftop nights, when the city lights made the sky feel endless, and Lucas whispered about wanting to escape the world of cameras and boardrooms, just to live a normal life, with her. She believed him. She believed every word, every promise left unfinished in the spaces between kisses and silence. But one day, he was gone. No goodbye. No explanation. Just a cool, carefully worded message that he needed space to focus on his future. She had waited for him to call. She tried to find him, sent one long, desperate voicemail, then another. But the silence that followed wasn't empty, it was deliberate. It was final. And so she stopped waiting. Amber threw herself into her work, pouring her heartbreak into blueprints and deadlines, trying to lose herself in her studies. But just weeks later, she began to feel the changes in her body. The fatigue. The nausea. The delay. She told herself it was stress. But when she took a pregnancy test and saw the result, her breath caught. She didn't cry. She just stood in the bathroom, staring at the word positive as if it were written in another language. Then she sat on the edge of her bed and said nothing for a very long time. The doctor confirmed her pregnancy. But the ultrasound revealed something she hadn't expected: 2 heartbeats. Twin boys. 2 lives growing inside her. 2 reminders of a man who had walked away without ever turning back. She considered calling him again. She imagined what she would say. But then she remembered the voicemail. The cold response from his assistant. The way he had vanished like she meant nothing. And she realized she couldn't go through that again. So she didn't call. She didn't write. She erased his number. She accepted, deep in her soul, that he wasn't coming back. Amber decided to leave New York. There was no place for her there anymore. She took a job in a smaller city, in a drafting office where no one asked questions about her past. She rented a modest apartment and lived carefully, saving every cent. Pregnancy with twins was hard, but she was harder. She worked through swollen feet, sleepless nights, and the fear that she was completely alone in the world. She took prenatal vitamins with food stamps. She skipped meals to pay for baby clothes. And when the time came, she gave birth to 2 healthy, beautiful boys, Logan and Simon. They had blonde hair from the very beginning, and the bluest eyes she had ever seen. It was like looking at 2 tiny versions of the man she had once loved. At first, it broke her heart to see him in their faces. But over time, that feeling softened into something else, something fiercer. Love. Not for what could have been, but for what was. Her sons were everything. They were wild and loud and messy and perfect. They were the reason she got out of bed when her body ached and her bank account hit zero. She worked late nights, held freelance gigs, took on commissions, floor plans for shops, cafes, even barns, anything that kept the lights on. She fed her boys, clothed them, kissed their bruises, and read them bedtime stories even when she was too tired to stand. Amber never said Lucas's name. Not once. When the boys asked why they didn't have a dad, she told them the truth, gently, that sometimes people leave because they're afraid of love, and it's not their fault, and it's not ours either. She didn't speak of revenge. She didn't dwell on the past. She poured all of her energy into raising 2 kind, curious, and brave little boys who had no idea they carried a last name that once ruled a city. And still, late at night, when they were asleep, she sometimes found herself imagining what Lucas would say if he saw them. Would he recognize them as his? Would he feel anything at all? Or would he do what he did best, turn away and pretend none of it mattered? She told herself it didn't matter. That she didn't care. That she had built a life without him. And it was true. But fate, as always, had other plans. The invitation had come unexpectedly, tucked into the inbox of Amber's modest freelance email with a generic subject line: Architectural Futures Forum, Speaker Selection. At first, she assumed it was a mistake. She had never presented at any major event, let alone one in New York City. But the message was real. They had reviewed her design proposal for a women's shelter, sustainable, low-cost, and community-focused, and wanted her to speak on the panel. It wasn't paid, but they would cover travel and accommodations. It was the break she had dreamed of for years, and the kind of recognition she never thought she'd receive as a solo mother of two, hustling in the background of the architectural world. She hesitated only for a moment. Then she said yes. Returning to New York after 5 years felt surreal. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt familiar. She arrived with Logan and Simon in tow, two energetic 5-year-olds who asked non-stop questions on the flight, who stared wide-eyed at the skyline and said the buildings looked like Lego towers. She dressed them neatly for the forum, in little collared shirts and clean sneakers, and packed a bag full of coloring books and snacks to keep them occupied while she presented. She had no one to watch them, and she wasn't about to let that stop her. They sat patiently near the back of the exhibit space as she stood beside her shelter model, her palms slightly sweaty, her heart racing. The event was hosted in a high-rise downtown, glass walls wrapping around the venue, sunlight pouring in. She tried not to think about the possibility of running into anyone she knew. New York was big. He wouldn't be here. Why would he? Then she heard his voice. She was in the middle of answering a question from a reporter when it cut through the air, low, confident, and too familiar to ignore. She froze. Her stomach dropped before her eyes even confirmed it. Lucas Rivers stood less than 20 feet away, laughing softly with a group of sponsors in sleek suits. He hadn't changed. Blonde hair still immaculate, posture as effortless as ever, but older now, harder around the edges. His expression was calm, until it landed on her. Amber saw the moment it hit him. First confusion. Then shock. Then something deeper. His eyes drifted past her, to the two boys sitting on the floor behind her table, coloring quietly on the carpet. Time slowed. Lucas's face went pale. His gaze locked on the twins, and Amber could see the wheels turning, fast and desperate. She didn't move. She didn't smile. She didn't look away. He walked toward her. She stiffened, clutching the edge of the display table like it might anchor her to the floor. The people around her seemed to fade into background noise. The city, the forum, the years, everything shrank to this one impossible moment. He stopped in front of her, his voice barely audible. Amber. She didn't respond. He looked down again at the boys, then back up at her, visibly shaken. Are they? She held his gaze. Yes, she said, calm and quiet. They're yours. He stepped back, stunned. For a moment, he looked like someone who had just been punched. I didn't know, he said. I had no idea. I know, she replied, her voice steady. I tried. You made sure I couldn't reach you. He blinked, trying to process it all. But, why didn't you try again? Amber laughed softly, bitter and tired. I did. I left messages. Sent letters. Your assistant told me not to call again. I figured you made your choice. Lucas looked down, the weight of realization settling heavily on his face. He turned to look at the boys again, still unaware of who he was. Logan glanced up, smiled, and waved at him innocently. I need to talk to you, Lucas said, his voice cracking just slightly. Amber crossed her arms. Now you want to talk? After 5 years? At a public event? He hesitated, then nodded slowly. I do. I need to explain. And I need to understand. She stared at him for a long time. The ache she had buried deep inside flared to the surface, but she didn't let it show. Not here. Not yet. You don't get to walk back into this like nothing happened, she said. But if you really want to understand, start by learning their names. Lucas looked at her, and something broke open in his eyes. He turned to the boys again, knelt down, and asked, gently, "What are your names?" The twins looked at him, puzzled but curious. "I'm Logan," one said. "I'm Simon," the other added. "What's your name?" Lucas smiled sadly. "I'm Lucas." They didn't recognize it. Why would they? Amber watched from behind the table, her heart pounding. This was not the moment she had prepared for. She never thought it would come. And yet, here they were. Not as strangers. Not yet as a family. But something had begun to shift. The truth had finally surfaced. And nothing would be the same again. Lucas didn't sleep that night. After the forum, after the longest and most jarring day of his life, he returned to his apartment, a place that once felt like the pinnacle of success and now felt hollow, stripped of meaning. The image of the two boys lingered in his mind, haunting and vivid. Logan and Simon. Their names echoed through his thoughts like a mantra he had never known he needed. He could still see their eyes, so familiar it made his chest ache, and the way they had looked at him without recognition. They didn't know him. They didn't know he existed. And that realization, more than anything, shattered him. The next morning, he requested a private DNA test. He didn't tell anyone. Not his assistant, not his legal team, not his parents. It wasn't about legality. It was about something he couldn't name, something urgent and personal, like he needed permission to believe the truth even though every part of him already knew it. The results came 3 days later, 99.9% match. There was no denying it. He was their father. Lucas stared at the document in silence for a long time. Then he carefully folded it and placed it in a drawer, like it was something sacred and heavy. Not a piece of paper, but a door that had just opened. A door he had unknowingly locked from the outside 5 years ago. He contacted Amber through the event coordinator, not wanting to push too hard. She agreed to meet him, once, at a small coffee shop on the Lower East Side. No lawyers. No assistants. Just them. She arrived with her usual quiet strength, dressed simply, her hair tied back. She looked tired but composed, and more beautiful than he remembered. Life had shaped her in new ways, added a gravity to her gaze that hadn't been there before. He stood when she entered. She didn't smile. They sat across from each other, two people with years of pain between them and two children unknowingly binding them forever. For a long moment, they said nothing. The noise of the cafe buzzed around them, cups clinking, milk steaming, quiet conversations. "I got the results," Lucas said finally. "They're mine." Amber nodded. "I know." He ran a hand through his hair, struggling to find words that meant enough. "I don't know what to say to you." She looked at him, eyes clear. "Then don't say anything you don't mean." "I mean everything now," he said. Amber, I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't." "I believe you," she said. "But that doesn't erase what happened." He looked down, shame washing over him. "I wanted to fight for you. I was going to. But my parents, the board, everything came crashing in. I didn't know how to be both the man they expected and the man you needed." "You chose them," she said, without malice. "You left." He nodded slowly. "I did. And I had to raise them without you," she continued. "While you were building empires, I was building cribs. While you were giving speeches, I was trying to find enough for dinner." Lucas winced. Her words weren't cruel, they were just true. And they hit harder than anything he could have anticipated. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," he said. "Not yet. I just want a chance. To know them. To be part of their lives. Even if it's just small. Even if it's just," he paused, his voice faltering. "I can't go back, Amber. But I can show up now. I can try." She studied him carefully. They don't know you. They don't even know what a father is. To them, I am their entire world. I don't want to take anything from you, he said quickly. I only want to add to what you've built. Amber exhaled slowly. They're 5. They don't understand betrayal or loyalty. But they understand presence. You can't come in and out. You can't start and stop. If you want to be in their lives, it has to be all the way. I'm in, he said without hesitation. Whatever it takes. She nodded, still wary, but something in her posture softened. Then you'll start small. Pick them up from school one day. Come to the park. Sit with them. Let them come to you. If they ask questions, answer them honestly. If they run from you, don't chase them. Just be there. Lucas nodded, humbled. Okay. I can do that. As they left the cafe, they didn't part with hugs or promises. Just an understanding. A fragile agreement between two people no longer in love, but forever connected. Amber walked ahead, and Lucas followed at a respectful distance, not as a partner, not yet as a father, but as a man finally trying to make right what had once gone so terribly wrong. Lucas's first visit to the boys' school was nothing like the corporate events he was used to. There were no polished suits, no rehearsed speeches, no executives to impress. Instead, there were sticky handprints on the classroom walls, paper airplanes flying through the hallway, and the unmistakable chaos of 20 children navigating their tiny universes. Lucas stood near the school gate in a casual sweater and jeans, awkward and unsure of where to put his hands. He had reviewed boardroom acquisitions worth billions without breaking a sweat, but waiting to pick up his sons who didn't even know they were his, made him feel like a nervous teenager. Amber had arranged it carefully. She told the boys that a friend would be picking them up and walking them to the park. No labels, no explanations, just an opportunity for them to meet him on neutral ground. When Logan and Simon came bounding out of the school doors, Lucas recognized them instantly. Their blonde hair shimmered in the sunlight, and their identical blue eyes lit up when they spotted him, though they didn't quite understand who he was. He knelt down, unsure of the script. Hi. I'm Lucas. Your mom asked me to take you to the park today. That okay? The boys looked at each other, then back at him. Logan tilted his head. Are you the man from the building with all the people in suits? Lucas smiled. Yeah, that was me. Simon squinted. Do you have snacks? Lucas laughed. Yes. Lots of them. That was enough. They took his hands without hesitation and led the way, chattering about dinosaurs and spaceships and how Logan's teacher said Pluto wasn't a planet anymore, which he found totally unfair. Lucas listened to everything, responding when he could, but mostly just absorbing them. Their voices. Their expressions. Their absolute, unfiltered joy. It was overwhelming in the best way. At the park, they ran ahead to the swings, and Lucas sat on a bench nearby, watching them. For a few minutes, he let himself pretend this had always been his life. That he had always been here for them, on days like this, in moments like this. But that illusion cracked when Simon fell off the slide and hit his elbow. He didn't cry right away. He just froze, eyes wide and glossy, trying to decide if the pain was worth the tears. Lucas rushed over without thinking, crouched down, and gently checked his arm. You're okay, he said softly. It's not bleeding. Just a bump. Simon blinked. You sound like Mommy. Lucas paused, then said quietly, I'm trying to be good at this. Simon leaned into him, just for a second, and that tiny gesture nearly broke Lucas in two. He looked up and saw Logan standing nearby, watching carefully. There was something calculating in his gaze, not suspicion, exactly, but quiet assessment. Lucas knew that look. He had worn it himself, long ago, when trying to decide whether someone was safe. Logan finally walked over. Are you gonna come back? Lucas met his eyes, steady. Yeah. I will. Logan nodded once, as if satisfied, then ran off again, calling for Simon to chase him. Lucas stayed there a moment longer, trying to catch his breath. That one question, "Are you gonna come back?" had felt heavier than any contract he'd ever signed. But his answer had come out true. He would come back. Again and again. The visits continued, quietly and consistently. Lucas showed up at school pickups, at the park, at birthday parties of classmates he didn't know. He learned which juice boxes they hated, which superhero was currently cool, and how to separate them when they fought over the same Lego piece. He learned how to kneel down and really listen. How to put his phone away. How to just be there. Over time, the boys grew used to him. They laughed more. They called him by his name with a little more familiarity. Logan started asking questions. "Did you know my mom when she was young? Do you live in a really big house? Why don't you have any kids?" Lucas answered honestly, carefully. He never rushed them. He never tried to earn something they weren't ready to give. One evening, as he walked them back to Amber's apartment, Simon reached for his hand without being asked. Logan did the same, then looked up and asked, "Why do you always smile when we talk?" Lucas looked at them both, their cheeks flushed from running, their matching backpacks bouncing with each step. "Because I'm lucky," he said simply. "I get to be here with you." Amber was waiting at the door, arms crossed, unsure. She always watched him closely after each visit, as if trying to measure if he'd earned another. But this time, something shifted. She saw the boys run inside, laughing, telling her about the swings and how Lucas had almost fallen trying to race them. And then she looked at him. "You didn't leave today," she said quietly. "You stayed even when Simon got scared. You stayed even when Logan got quiet." Lucas nodded. "I told them I would." Amber looked down, then back at him. "Keep doing that." And just like that, without grand gestures or emotional speeches, the wall between them lowered. Not gone. But thinner. And Lucas knew this wasn't about being forgiven in one moment, it was about showing up in hundreds of them. And he would. Every time. Lucas didn't expect the word to come so soon. It had been almost 3 months since he started seeing Logan and Simon regularly. He never missed a visit. Never arrived late. He learned to sit in silence when they were in bad moods, to join in when they asked for help with puzzles, and to listen when they just needed to talk, even if what they said made little sense. He was careful not to push too far too fast. He had accepted the fact that, for now, he was just Lucas, the man who brought good snacks, played tag without checking his phone, and laughed at their jokes even when they made no sense. But something had changed. It was a Saturday afternoon. Amber had an interview for a new design contract and asked Lucas if he could watch the boys for a few hours. He agreed immediately, and she dropped them off at his apartment, which he had recently child-proofed, despite never thinking he'd need to. Toys now lived in woven baskets in the living room. A tiny table with crayons and construction paper sat near the window. The fridge was stocked with juice boxes, string cheese, and the kind of cereal that came with marshmallows he didn't approve of but bought anyway because they loved it. That afternoon, they built an elaborate pillow fort between the couches, complete with tunnels and a command center made from old shoe boxes and flashlights. Logan declared himself captain. Simon insisted on being science officer, because he had brought a magnifying glass. Lucas played along as Commander Dad, a name Simon made up halfway through their game and said without thinking. Lucas froze for a second, caught off guard by the word. Dad. He didn't respond to it immediately, afraid that if he reacted too much, it would make Simon take it back. So he just smiled and played the part. But inside, he was a mess of emotion. The word kept echoing in his mind. He hadn't earned it yet. Or maybe he had, slowly, in pieces. Not through grand gestures, but through consistency, time, and quiet love. Later that evening, after they had eaten takeout and were lying under the still-standing pillow fort watching a cartoon, Simon curled up against his side and looked up at him. "Can I call you Dad now? Or do I have to wait?" Lucas felt his throat tighten. He looked down at Simon's small, serious face, then at Logan, who was watching him too, quietly holding his favorite stuffed dinosaur. Lucas reached out and pulled them both closer. "You can call me whatever feels right to you," he said, his voice thick. "But if you want to call me Dad, I'd be really proud of that." Simon nodded. Logan gave him a small smile, the kind that said more than words. That night, Amber came to pick them up. She found them asleep on the couch, Simon lying across Lucas's chest, Logan curled against his side, both of them snoring softly. Lucas had fallen asleep too, his arm protectively around them both, the TV still glowing quietly in the background. She didn't wake them immediately. She stood there for a long moment, just watching. Something inside her, something that had been locked away, began to shift. She saw how Lucas held them in his sleep, as if they had always been there. She saw how safe they looked. How peaceful. When she finally did wake him, Lucas stirred slowly, blinking as he realized where he was and what time it was. "Sorry," he whispered. "We must have all passed out." Amber shook her head. They were happy. That's what matters. As he gently lifted the boys and helped carry them to the car, he glanced at her. "Simon called me Dad today," he said quietly. "He asked if it was okay." Amber didn't speak right away. Then she looked at him and said, "He wouldn't have asked if he didn't already mean it." The drive home was quiet. Lucas rode in the back seat beside the boys, holding their hands as they slept. Amber watched in the rearview mirror, and something inside her settled for the first time in a long time. The walls she had built to protect herself, understandable, necessary walls, began to lower. Not all at once, but piece by piece. That night, Lucas couldn't sleep. He lay awake in his apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the way Simon had looked when he said the word Dad. It wasn't a title that could be claimed. It had to be given. Earned. And now it had been. In the stillness of that night, for the first time in years, Lucas felt complete. Not because of success or wealth or reputation. But because two little boys had chosen to let him in. Not as a guest. Not as a visitor. But as their father. Lucas hadn't planned on confronting his parents. He had avoided it for months, pushing down the urge every time it rose in him, focusing instead on showing up for Logan and Simon, on earning Amber's cautious trust, on building something genuine from the pieces of the life he had once destroyed. But there came a point where silence no longer felt like strength, it felt like surrender. The more he stepped into fatherhood, the more he saw what he had almost missed forever, and the more unbearable it became to know that his parents had stolen that from him with a smile and a firm handshake. He had to face them, not for closure, but for clarity. He needed them to see what they had done, and more importantly, what he would never allow them to do again. He arrived at the Rivers estate on a crisp Sunday morning. It was exactly as he remembered, impeccably landscaped, cold, and quiet. A place designed for appearances, not comfort. His father greeted him in the library, seated in the same leather chair where so many past conversations had been framed as lectures. His mother appeared moments later, immaculate as ever, her expression unreadable. "I'm surprised you came," his father said, folding his hands. "We didn't think we'd hear from you again." Lucas didn't sit. He stood near the fireplace, his posture calm but unyielding. "We need to talk. About Amber. About the boys." His mother stiffened at the mention of her. "We warned you about her years ago." Lucas turned to her, his voice sharp but controlled. "You didn't warn me. You lied to me. You blocked letters, ignored calls. You told people to keep her away from me." His father's eyes narrowed. We did what was necessary to protect your future. You were emotional. Unfocused. You would have thrown away your entire legacy for a girl who had nothing. Lucas took a breath, the fury rising in his chest. That girl is the mother of my children. The boys you never even cared to know existed. She raised them alone. With nothing. And they turned out better than anything this family ever produced. His mother stood, her voice clipped. Don't be dramatic. You think we haven't sacrificed for you? For this name? Your success. My success, Lucas interrupted, has nothing to do with this name anymore. The company, the image, the money, none of it matters if it costs me my humanity. You tried to make me choose between love and legacy, and I listened to you. I walked away from the only real thing I had. But I won't make that mistake again. There was a heavy silence. His father leaned back, his tone suddenly cooler, more strategic. So what now? You're going to play house with some woman and pretend you're a family man? You think the world will buy that? Lucas looked at him, disgusted. I don't care what the world buys. I care what Logan and Simon see when they look at me. I care what kind of man I am when I tuck them in at night. And I care about the woman who carried that weight when I walked away. His mother opened her mouth, but he didn't let her speak. I'm not here for your blessing. I'm here to tell you that your control ends here. If you can't accept my family, you won't be part of our lives. That's your choice. But I'm done living under your version of success. They didn't respond right away. There was a crack in the room, a visible fracture in the illusion of power they'd always held over him. For the first time, Lucas wasn't the boy seeking approval. He was the man drawing the line. I pity you, he added quietly. You'll never know them. You'll never get to hear Logan explain how he thinks the moon controls feelings, or see the way Simon draws his dreams. You'll miss it all. And one day, you'll realize you traded your grandchildren for control. He turned and walked out, leaving them in their perfect, empty house. When he got back to his apartment, Amber and the boys were waiting. She looked up when he entered, reading his face in an instant. You told them, she said. He nodded. Everything. And? They didn't take it well. Amber stepped closer. Do you regret it? Lucas looked at his sons, who were building towers from blocks on the floor, their laughter echoing through the room. Not for a second, he said. That evening, after the boys were in bed, Amber handed him a small box. Inside was a photograph, one she'd taken weeks ago when he wasn't looking. He was sitting in the grass at the park, Simon on his lap, Logan leaning against his side, all three of them mid-laughter. She had printed it, framed it. A silent gesture. A thank you. A beginning. Lucas held the photo for a long time before placing it on the bookshelf beside the boys' art projects. He no longer needed validation from anyone but them. His family. His future. The life he chose, finally, on his own terms. Autumn in the city had a way of softening everything. The sharp angles of buildings blurred under golden light, the noise of traffic seemed gentler, and even the wind carried a kind of quiet. For Lucas, the change of seasons mirrored what was happening inside him, something long cold had begun to thaw, and in its place was a warmth he had once feared he didn't deserve. It had been nearly a year since he'd found out about Logan and Simon, and every day since had been a choice. He had chosen them. Chosen Amber. Chosen to show up over and over again, not as the perfect man, but as a present one. Life wasn't flawless, but it was full. His mornings began with spilled cereal, mismatched socks, and the chaos of getting 2 5-year-olds out the door. His nights ended with bedtime stories and small hands curled into his shirt as they drifted off beside him. His apartment had long since transformed from a sleek, lifeless bachelor space into a warm, lived-in home where finger paintings lined the walls and tiny sneakers were always kicked off near the door. The boys called him Dad now, without hesitation. Sometimes in excitement. Sometimes in frustration. Sometimes in whispers when they needed comfort. And every single time, it still hit him with the quiet force of wonder. Amber had softened too. Not completely, there were still moments where the weight of their history made her withdraw just slightly, but those moments were fewer now, and always followed by something small but meaningful, a look, a hand on his back, a sentence left unfinished but understood. They had built trust again, not through dramatic apologies or grand gestures, but through the simple rhythm of shared responsibility and mutual care. He respected her more than ever, not just for raising the boys alone, but for doing it without ever letting her pain make her bitter. She had every reason to shut him out forever, but she didn't. And that forgiveness, unspoken but felt, was the greatest gift he had ever been given. One Saturday morning, as the boys played in the living room and Amber brewed coffee in the kitchen, Lucas stood at the window with a small box in his hand. It wasn't velvet-lined or brand name. It was simple, clean, and carefully chosen. Inside was a ring, delicate but strong. He had spent months thinking about how to ask her. At first, he imagined something big, roses, photographers, some sweeping gesture with the skyline behind them. But that wasn't their story. Their story had been rebuilt in quiet hours, in soft apologies, in Lego-strewn halls and crayon-signed notes. It didn't need fireworks. It needed truth. He walked into the kitchen and waited until she looked up. She raised an eyebrow at the seriousness on his face. "What happened?" she asked. "Nothing," he said. "That's kind of the point." He took her hand and led her into the living room where the boys were still playing. They looked up, curious but not surprised. Lucas got down on one knee, and for a moment, everything around him faded into stillness. "I don't want to rewrite the past," he said. "I just want to write the rest of the story with you in it. As your partner. As the father of our boys. As the man who finally understands what it means to love fully and show up completely." Amber's eyes shimmered, but she didn't cry. She was too strong for that. She smiled, small at first, then wider, and nodded. "Yes," she said simply. "Because I don't need perfect. I just need you." The boys clapped, not entirely sure what had just happened, but sensing it was something good. They piled into his arms, knocking him off balance until they all collapsed into a laughing heap on the rug. The wedding came a few months later. It wasn't extravagant. It didn't need to be. They held it in the small community garden Amber helped design years ago. Friends gathered, close and quiet, sitting between rows of late-blooming marigolds and ivy-covered fences. The boys wore matching vests and carried the rings, too excited to walk slowly down the aisle. Amber wore a simple ivory dress, her hair loose, a daisy tucked behind one ear. Lucas couldn't stop smiling as she walked toward him, her step steady, her eyes locked on his. There were no speeches about destiny, no quotes from poems. Just vows spoken from the heart, short, honest, unpolished. Promises to choose each other, not only on the bright days but on the hard ones too. Promises to parent as a team. To make mistakes and forgive them. To hold each other accountable and hold each other close. When they kissed, it wasn't the kind of kiss that marked a beginning. It was the kind that sealed something already built, slowly, painfully, beautifully. Afterward, as the sun dipped low and the garden glowed in golden light, Logan and Simon ran through the grass, shrieking with joy. Lucas stood watching them, his hand wrapped around Amber's, his chest full of a peace he had never known in his previous life of boardrooms and silence. He had once believed success meant power, image, control. But standing there, barefoot in a garden with the love of his life beside him and his sons chasing butterflies in front of him, he finally understood what it really meant. He was home. Fully. Finally. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. The ending of this story isn't just satisfying, it's quietly powerful. It doesn't rely on over-the-top redemption or fairy tale perfection, but instead celebrates the slow, human work of rebuilding. Lucas's transformation isn't instant, it's earned, step by step, through presence, humility, and a willingness to face what he once ran from. That's what makes it meaningful. Amber's strength is the emotional backbone of the story. She never needed saving. She needed respect, consistency, and truth, and in the end, she got all three, not because she forgave easily, but because she knew her worth. The love they rediscover is not naive or romanticized. It's mature, layered with pain and healing, and stronger because of what they've survived. The final image, a family grounded in love, choice, and second chances, isn't just beautiful. It's hopeful. It reminds us that broken things aren't always lost. Sometimes, they're just waiting to be rebuilt, brick by honest brick. He thought he was just picking up his daughter from school, until a poor boy saved her life, and revealed a truth that changed everything. Matthew Carter wasn't used to witnessing things he couldn't control. He had built his empire with precision, every risk calculated, every decision executed with cold efficiency. As the CEO of one of the country's top investment firms, he was a man whose voice could move markets. Yet nothing in his professional life could have prepared him for what he saw that afternoon outside his daughter's elementary school. The day had been routine, at least on the surface. Meetings, calls, contracts. He left the office earlier than usual, checking his watch as his black SUV pulled up outside the school gates. His driver stepped out, but Matthew motioned for him to stay. He preferred to greet Haley himself, especially now. His 6-year-old daughter had broken her leg 3 weeks earlier during a playground accident. She was brave about it, too brave sometimes. Walking on crutches, refusing help, smiling through pain. She reminded him so much of her mother it hurt. That day, instead of waiting for one of the teachers to escort her across the small street in front of the school, Haley had insisted she could manage on her own. He saw her from across the street, determinedly making her way down the curb, balancing the weight of her backpack, wobbling slightly on her crutches. At first, he smiled, proud, amused, affectionate. Then she slipped. It was a quick, terrifying moment. Her foot caught the edge of a crack in the sidewalk, her crutches jolted, and her injured leg folded awkwardly beneath her. She let out a gasp, and her body swayed forward toward the street, toward a slow-moving car that was just far enough away to make time feel cruelly suspended. But before he could react, before he could even call her name, someone else moved. A boy, no older than 8, darted forward from the sidewalk. Thin, small, wearing a faded red hoodie and sneakers that looked too big for his feet. His blonde hair was messy, and his pale face was flushed from the cold. He caught Haley by the arm with surprising steadiness and guided her back onto the sidewalk. Not roughly, not panicked, gently, like someone used to being careful. Matthew was already halfway across the street by the time he reached them. His heart was pounding. Haley looked shaken but unhurt. She clutched her crutches and blinked up at the boy beside her, who was now brushing off his jeans like nothing had happened. "Be more careful next time," the boy said to her, smiling. "Crutches are tricky." Haley nodded, still catching her breath. "Thanks." Matthew crouched beside her and checked her leg quickly, his hands moving with the calmness of practiced worry. Then he turned to the boy. "You helped her," he said quietly, still processing. "Thank you." The boy looked up at him. Blue eyes, clear, steady, and older than they should have been. He shrugged. She needed help. There was something about him that struck Matthew immediately. The clothes were clean but old, the backpack slung over his shoulder looked nearly empty, and his shoes, tied with mismatched laces, had holes near the toes. But it wasn't pity that gripped him. It was something else. Something quieter. "Where are your parents?" he asked, not harshly, just curious. The boy didn't hesitate. "They're gone. I'm by myself." Matthew froze. He didn't mean to show it, but the words hit him like a blow to the chest. The boy said it so plainly, so matter-of-factly, as if he had accepted it long ago and had no need to explain further. Haley, still recovering from the scare, reached out and touched the boy's hand. "Do you want to meet my dog?" she asked innocently, as if that might fix everything. The boy smiled. "I like dogs." Matthew stood there, in the middle of the sidewalk, feeling the weight of the moment settle over him like fog. His driver stood by the car, unsure whether to approach. The world around them kept moving, cars passed, teachers waved goodbye to students, a gust of wind blew a crumpled piece of paper across the pavement. But something had shifted. Matthew looked at the boy again, this child who had appeared out of nowhere, who had protected his daughter with a stranger's instinct and then declared, without bitterness or sadness, that he had no one. Matthew Carter had made a career out of recognizing opportunity. But what he felt in that moment wasn't a business instinct. It was the sudden, undeniable pull of something more. Something he hadn't felt in years. Something dangerously close to fate. Matthew couldn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint hum of the city beyond his windows, his mind cycling endlessly through the same image, that boy's face, his small hand steadying Haley, and the quiet way he'd said, "I'm by myself." The words weren't dramatic or self-pitying. They were stated as fact, with a calmness that didn't match his age. That's what disturbed Matthew most. It wasn't the tragedy of it, it was the normalization. As if being alone in the world was just something the boy had learned to carry like a coat too big for his shoulders. He got up before sunrise, restless, and made his way to the kitchen where the lights were soft and the silence sharper. He poured himself a cup of coffee but didn't drink it. Instead, he stood by the window, watching the darkness slowly peel back from the skyline. He didn't know the boy's name. He didn't know where he came from. But something inside him wouldn't let it go. He was a man used to solving problems with resources, people, money, access, but this wasn't a problem to fix. It was something deeper, something human. For the first time in years, he felt like a man staring at a story he didn't yet understand. Later that morning, while Haley ate breakfast and told him a long, winding story about a classmate who had tried to glue googly eyes to her crutches, Matthew casually asked if the boy from yesterday went to her school. "No," she said between bites of cereal. "I've never seen him before. I think he was just there. Maybe he was walking by." He nodded but didn't respond. He didn't want to alarm her, and he certainly didn't want to make her feel responsible. After dropping her off, he instructed his driver to circle the blocks around the school. For the better part of 2 hours, he scanned the sidewalks, parks, store entrances, anywhere a child might linger without drawing too much attention. Nothing. By the third hour, Matthew had called in a quiet favor from someone in the city's administrative offices, a friend who owed him. He asked for any recent missing child reports, unofficial shelter admissions, or unaccompanied minors flagged by police. Still nothing. The boy was invisible, or at least outside the system. That realization unsettled Matthew more than anything else. In his world, data was everything. People left traces, social security numbers, tax records, school forms. The idea that a child could live in a major city without a footprint made him feel like he was standing in a house where the walls didn't hold. Later that day, Matthew returned to the school at dismissal time. He stood near the gate, talking idly with one of the teachers about Haley's progress, his eyes constantly scanning the sidewalk, the bus stops, the alleys across the street. And then he saw him. Same hoodie, same oversized shoes, a little more dirt on his jeans. The boy was sitting on the edge of a planter across the street, eating what looked like a half-eaten granola bar. Matthew excused himself and crossed over. As he approached, the boy looked up and froze, cautious but not afraid. He didn't run. He didn't smile. He just waited. "You're here again," Matthew said, stopping a few feet away. The boy nodded, chewing slowly. "You waiting for someone?" "No." "Are you staying somewhere nearby?" "Sort of." Matthew studied him. There were dark circles under his eyes, and though he looked alert, there was a tension in his shoulders, the kind of constant readiness that came from sleeping in unsafe places. His backpack was zipped shut, but Matthew could see it sagged almost flat. No books. No lunchbox. No change of clothes. "What's your name?" he asked gently. "Lucas." "How old are you?" 8. "Where are you sleeping, Lucas?" Lucas hesitated. "Library sometimes. Or stairs. Depends." Matthew felt something shift in his chest. He had donated millions to children's charities, funded shelters, spoken at galas. But this was different. This wasn't charity. This was a boy who had saved his daughter from harm and then returned to vanish into a city that didn't care if he survived the night. "Would you let me get you something to eat?" Matthew asked. Lucas paused again, then nodded slowly. "Okay." They sat in a quiet diner 2 blocks away. Lucas ordered pancakes and orange juice. He ate like someone used to not knowing when his next meal would come, careful but fast, not wasting a bite. He didn't talk much. Matthew didn't push. He listened. When Lucas did speak, it was in short, precise sentences. His mother had died 6 months ago from a long illness. They'd had no family left. After she passed, a neighbor called Child Services. He ended up in a shelter, but it was crowded, loud, and cruel. He left. No one came after him. "I didn't like it there," he said, almost apologetically. "People yelled a lot." Matthew nodded. "I understand." Lucas looked at him. "Do you?" Matthew took a long breath. "Maybe not all of it. But I understand not wanting to be somewhere that doesn't feel safe." Lucas didn't respond. He just kept eating. When the check came, Matthew paid and then asked the question he'd been carrying all day. "Would you like to come stay at my house for a while? Just for tonight. You'll have your own room. A warm bed. No one yelling." Lucas blinked at him. "Why?" Matthew hesitated. "Because you helped my daughter. And because you look like someone who deserves better than this." There was a long silence. Finally, Lucas whispered, "Okay. But just for one night." Matthew smiled, not pressing further. One night. That was enough, for now. He had no idea what would come next. But as they walked out of the diner side by side, something told him the moment he'd seen Lucas steady his daughter wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. Lucas didn't say much during the car ride. He sat in the back seat beside Haley, who was chatting excitedly about the pancakes he'd just eaten and telling him all the things they had at home, a huge bookshelf, a dog named Biscuit, a playroom with too many pillows, and a freezer full of the good ice cream, not the boring kind. Lucas nodded politely, responding with quiet smiles and the occasional, "cool," or "really," but he never let his body fully relax. His fingers stayed curled in his lap, his eyes drifting often to the window as if memorizing the streets in case he needed to run later. Matthew watched all of it through the rearview mirror. His instinct was to ask questions, to offer reassurance, to make the boy feel safe. But instead, he held back, sensing that Lucas didn't need words right now. He needed space. So Matthew focused on driving, letting Haley do the talking while Lucas observed the world with the quiet wariness of someone who had learned not to trust comfort too quickly. When they pulled into the driveway, Lucas's eyes widened, just slightly. The house was modern and spacious, tucked behind a tall hedge and a security gate, nothing overly flashy, but clearly far from the world he'd been surviving in. Biscuit, a scruffy golden retriever mix, came barreling toward the front door as they entered, tail wagging in a full-body blur. Haley laughed and dropped her crutches carefully so she could give him a hug. Lucas froze in the doorway, not sure if he was allowed to step inside. "You can come in," Matthew said gently. "This is your home too, for tonight." Lucas stepped inside slowly, his movements careful and precise. He looked up at the high ceilings, the clean white walls lined with photographs and framed drawings, some of which Haley proudly announced were hers. He didn't say a word, but his eyes moved constantly, absorbing everything. Matthew led him to the guest room at the end of the hall. It was usually used for visiting family or friends, but it had a twin bed, a window with thick curtains, and a small bookshelf with a few forgotten novels on the bottom shelf. Lucas walked in like he was entering a museum. He ran a finger along the edge of the desk, glanced at the clean bedsheets, and whispered, "It smells nice in here." Matthew set down a fresh towel on the dresser and said, "There are clean clothes in the closet, some extras from Haley's cousin. They might be a bit big, but they're warm. If you need anything, just knock. I'll be right down the hall." Lucas nodded but said nothing. When Matthew left the room, he waited a full 5 minutes before he moved again. He closed the door softly and sat on the edge of the bed, bouncing slightly, testing its firmness. Then he stood up, opened the closet, and stared at the clean shirts and folded jeans. He didn't touch them, not yet. He looked at the towel, the books, the lamp beside the bed, and then at the window. He walked to it, pulled back the curtain just enough to see the street, memorizing the distance between the sidewalk and the front door. It was what he always did in a new place: map the exits, check the locks, build the escape route in his head. But that night, no one shouted. No one slammed doors. No one turned off the heat or left him alone in the dark. After dinner, grilled cheese sandwiches and tomato soup, which he ate with grateful silence, Haley showed him how to play one of her favorite board games. Lucas was hesitant at first, afraid to laugh, unsure whether this was something he was actually allowed to enjoy. But Haley was a force of nature. She teased him for being too serious, insisted he used the lucky token, and told him flat out that she didn't care if he lost, only that he played. He smiled. Just once. But it was real. That night, after Haley had gone to bed, Matthew checked in on Lucas. He expected to find the boy asleep or maybe curled up on top of the blankets. Instead, he found him sitting at the desk with the lamp on, holding one of the books from the shelf. He wasn't reading it, just looking at the pages slowly, carefully, as if the story might disappear if he turned them too quickly. "You okay?" Matthew asked softly from the doorway. Lucas nodded, not looking up. "I don't think I've ever had a room before." "Not really. Not just mine." Matthew hesitated. "You don't have to be alone in it. If you need something, anything, you just come find me. Understand?" Lucas nodded again. Matthew turned to leave but stopped when he heard the boy speak again. "I don't know how to be here." Matthew didn't answer right away. He stepped back into the room, knelt so they were eye level, and said, "You don't have to know. You're not expected to. All I care about is that you're safe, and warm, and not scared. That's it. Everything else, we'll figure out together." Lucas stared at him for a moment, eyes narrowing slightly as if testing whether the words were true. Then he gave the smallest nod and whispered, "Okay." That night, he slept under the covers. Not curled in a corner, not with one eye open. Under the covers. And when Matthew peeked in before going to bed himself, he saw that the book Lucas had been holding was now tucked under his pillow. It was a small thing. But sometimes, the smallest things mean a door has quietly opened in someone's heart. And Matthew knew that however temporary this had started, this boy wasn't just a visitor anymore. Over the next few days, something shifted in the house, not drastically, not in a way that anyone could easily point out, but in a quiet, undeniable current beneath the surface. Lucas remained cautious, but he no longer flinched at every unexpected sound. He began accepting second helpings at dinner without waiting to be asked, and once, Haley caught him humming under his breath while drawing with her at the kitchen table. Matthew noticed it all. He didn't comment on it, didn't bring attention to Lucas's slow softening, but he acknowledged it in other ways, by gently including him in more routines, by making sure Lucas had his own place at the table without being told, by asking him questions that didn't pry but reminded him he mattered. The third morning, when Lucas was still asleep, Matthew stood in the doorway and watched him for a moment. The boy had kicked one leg out of the blankets during the night and was curled on his side, the pillow hugged close, the same book still under his head. It hit Matthew then, not just the weight of what this child had lived through, but the staggering simplicity of what he seemed to need: stability, warmth, someone who didn't disappear. That morning, as Haley got ready for school, Matthew made a decision he hadn't allowed himself to consider fully until then. He was going to keep Lucas safe. Not just for a night, not just until the system found a place for him, but for as long as the boy wanted to stay. And if the system resisted, he'd fight it. The process began that day. Matthew met with a private attorney who specialized in family law. He explained the situation in detail, not hiding the fact that Lucas had been living on the streets, not trying to sanitize the truth. The lawyer, a calm woman named Margaret with a sharp mind and clear compassion in her eyes, listened carefully and then said what Matthew already knew. If he's not registered anywhere, no birth certificate on file, no foster record, no school enrollment, he's going to be almost invisible on paper. That can be good or bad. Good because there's no one to contest custody. Bad because it means we have to build an identity for him from the ground up. That takes time. And while we do that, someone may try to move him back into the state's custody. Matthew clenched his jaw. Then we move faster. Margaret raised an eyebrow. You're willing to fight this in court? Yes. You understand what kind of attention that may bring. You're a public figure. This could get loud. I don't care about noise, he said, his voice steady. I care about that boy. Margaret nodded. Then we'll start today. Over the next few weeks, Matthew did something he hadn't done in years: he slowed down. He rearranged his schedule, delegated more of his corporate obligations, and prioritized being home. He drove Haley to school himself, let Lucas pick out his own clothes for the day, even when the results were mismatched, and sat with both kids at the table while they did their homework. Haley adapted immediately. She never questioned the shift, never asked why Lucas was staying so long. To her, it simply made sense. He had helped her, so now they helped him. She treated him like a brother from the beginning, with the same mixture of teasing, loyalty, and fierce affection that only children seem to master so effortlessly. But not everyone was as accepting. When word began to spread that Matthew Carter had taken in a homeless boy, the speculation started. A few tabloids hinted that it was an image play, a publicity stunt. One gossip blog suggested Lucas might be an illegitimate child from a secret affair. Matthew ignored it all, but the noise grew louder when a particularly invasive journalist published photos of Lucas and Haley at a local park, framing the story as a billionaire's attempt at redemption. It wasn't just headlines. Matthew received a formal notice from the state, requesting a hearing to assess the temporary housing situation. The language was cold, legal, full of vague concern. It didn't accuse him of wrongdoing, but it questioned his long-term intentions. Lucas found the letter accidentally. It had been left on the kitchen counter, and when Matthew walked into the room, the boy was holding it, his hands trembling slightly. I can leave if it's causing trouble, he said quietly, not looking up. Matthew's voice was firm but gentle. You're not going anywhere. Lucas shook his head. They'll take me. They always do. Matthew crossed the room and knelt in front of him. No. Not this time. You're not a burden, Lucas. You're family. I don't care how long it takes or how hard it gets. I'm going to fight for you. Lucas looked at him then, really looked at him. There was disbelief in his eyes, but also something softer, hope trying to find a place to land. He didn't say anything, just nodded and held on to the letter like it was proof of something, even if he wasn't sure yet what it meant. That night, as Matthew lay in bed, he felt the weight of what he was doing settle fully onto his shoulders. This wasn't a business deal. There were no guaranteed outcomes, no projected returns. This was about a child, one who had trusted him not to vanish like everyone else had. And Matthew, for the first time in his life, wasn't interested in controlling the future. He just wanted to earn it. The night before the custody hearing, a storm swept through the city. Rain lashed against the windows, and thunder rumbled low across the skyline like the growl of something ancient and unsettled. Inside the Carter home, the atmosphere was calmer but undeniably tense. Lucas had been quieter than usual all day. He'd sat through dinner without saying much, picked at his food, and later declined Haley's offer to play cards, saying he was tired. He had gone to bed early, or at least pretended to. Matthew noticed. He always noticed now. He stood outside Lucas's bedroom door for a moment, debating whether to knock, then decided to let the boy have his silence. Not everything needed to be solved with words. But later that night, just before midnight, he heard a soft sound, a barely audible rustle, followed by the creak of the hallway floorboards. When he stepped out, Lucas was standing by the front door in his socks, holding his backpack tightly to his chest. Matthew didn't raise his voice. He didn't panic. He simply walked over and sat down on the bottom stair near the door, waiting. Lucas froze when he saw him but didn't run. His eyes were glassy with unshed tears, his jaw clenched like he was holding everything together with sheer force. "I wasn't going to steal anything," Lucas said quickly, before Matthew could speak. "I was just going to leave. I can't mess this up for you." Matthew remained seated, his expression calm. "Why would you think you're messing anything up?" Lucas looked down at his feet. "Because you're in trouble now. People are writing things, and tomorrow, they might take me away. If I leave first, maybe they won't bother you anymore." Matthew's heart cracked open in a way he hadn't thought possible. He rose slowly and walked over to Lucas, kneeling so they were at eye level. "Lucas," he said gently, "you are not trouble. You're not a problem to fix. You're not something I'm tolerating. You are part of this family. I don't want you to go. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Not ever." Lucas wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie, but the tears kept coming now, fast and hot. "They always say stuff like that. Then they leave. Or I have to." "I won't," Matthew said, without hesitation. "And if you ever feel scared again, I want you to come to me. Not the door. Me." There was a long silence between them, thick with emotion. Then Lucas stepped forward and leaned into him, awkwardly at first, like someone learning a language they were never taught. Matthew wrapped his arms around him and held him tightly, feeling how small and light he still was, how much of his body was made of fear he had no business carrying at such a young age. The next morning, the rain had stopped, but the clouds lingered. They arrived at the courthouse early, accompanied by Margaret, the attorney, and a court-appointed child psychologist who had interviewed Lucas in the weeks prior. Haley stayed home with a trusted nanny, unaware of the full stakes of the day but confident, as only a child could be, that her brother would come back home no matter what. Lucas sat beside Matthew in the waiting room, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, his knee bouncing with nervous energy. The boy had worn one of his new collared shirts and combed his hair carefully, but he still looked like someone waiting to be punished for something he didn't do. When they were called into the courtroom, the space felt larger than it needed to be, the walls sterile and indifferent. The judge was a woman in her 60s, with sharp eyes but a tired kindness beneath her formality. She asked the usual questions, about Matthew's employment, living situation, relationship with Lucas, intentions regarding long-term guardianship. Matthew answered calmly, clearly, without theatrics. Then the judge turned to Lucas. "Do you feel safe with Mr. Carter?" she asked. Lucas hesitated only a second before nodding. "Do you want to continue living with him?" Lucas looked at Matthew, then back at the judge. His voice came out small, but certain. "Yes. He doesn't pretend to care. He really does. And he doesn't leave. There was a pause in the room. Even Margaret looked down briefly, affected by the raw honesty in that quiet answer. The psychologist gave her professional evaluation, recommending in strong terms that Lucas remain in Matthew's care. "This is not a temporary arrangement born of pity," she said firmly. "This is a stable, nurturing home. The child has made visible emotional progress under Mr. Carter's guardianship, and the bond between them is authentic and mutually beneficial." The judge took a few minutes to review the documents. Then she looked up, hands folded in front of her. "In the absence of any viable biological guardianship and in consideration of the child's well-being, I am approving the petition for full legal custody. Lucas Carter will be officially recognized as the legal son of Matthew Carter, effective immediately." Matthew exhaled slowly, relief flooding him. He turned to Lucas, who blinked like he hadn't quite understood what had just happened. "It's official," Matthew said, voice low and smiling. "You're home." Lucas didn't smile at first. He looked down, then back up, and suddenly threw his arms around Matthew's neck, holding him tightly with a strength that came from every moment he'd ever been afraid to hope. That night, there were no reporters at the gate. No headlines in the papers. No loud declarations. Just a boy with a new last name, a man who had chosen to stay, and a family that had been formed not by blood, but by a decision to love without conditions. The weeks that followed the court's decision unfolded in quiet, steady rhythm. There was no sudden transformation, no grand emotional climax, just the gradual unfolding of a new normal, one built on stability, choice, and trust. Lucas no longer waited for permission to enter a room. He no longer flinched when someone raised their voice in another room or double-checked the exits before going to sleep. He began sleeping with his door closed, not because he was afraid of being seen, but because he finally believed no one would leave while he wasn't looking. Haley adapted seamlessly, as if nothing monumental had changed except the name she now used when introducing Lucas. "This is my brother," she'd say proudly to anyone who asked. Not, "foster brother," or "friend," or "just staying with us." Brother. Lucas, for his part, took some time to accept the word, not because he didn't want it, but because he had never been called anything that permanent before. School brought its own challenges. Lucas had been out of the system for almost a year, and even before that, his attendance had been spotty. He struggled with basic math and reading comprehension, though it was clear he was intelligent, just behind. Matthew hired a tutor, a patient woman named Evelyn, who came 3 times a week and treated Lucas not as a problem to be fixed but as a mind waiting to be reawakened. She never made him feel small for not knowing something. Instead, she celebrated the moment he figured it out. Lucas began looking forward to her visits more than anyone expected. One evening, while helping him with fractions at the dining table, Evelyn said gently, "You're not bad at this, you just never had someone sit with you long enough." Lucas didn't reply, but something shifted in his posture. He sat up straighter, leaned in, and tried again. Matthew continued to reshape his own life around this new reality. Meetings were now carefully scheduled to avoid missing bedtime stories. Boardrooms were exited early when school projects needed help. His staff adapted quickly, seeing the subtle but undeniable change in their boss. He hadn't become softer, but he had become more human. The man who used to measure time in billable hours now measured it in chapters read, dinners shared, and moments missed if he wasn't paying attention. The media storm eventually faded. Another scandal took its place in the news cycle, and the public's attention drifted, as it always does. The whispers about Matthew adopting a homeless boy turned into a footnote in online articles. But inside the Carter household, something far more important was taking root, a family, shaped not by resemblance or shared bloodlines, but by consistent presence and growing affection. One afternoon, Matthew returned from a meeting early to find the house quiet. Haley was at a play date. The tutor had just left. He walked past Lucas's room and noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, Lucas was sitting on the floor, surrounded by pages of pencil drawings, comic book panels, each one more detailed than the last. Matthew had seen him doodle before, but never like this. The drawings told a story: a young boy in a cape who didn't fly, but walked city streets, helping people, always alone until one panel showed him being offered a hand. Matthew knocked gently on the doorframe. Lucas looked up, startled at first, then relaxed. "Those are good," Matthew said. "You draw better than I ever could." Lucas shrugged, embarrassed. "Just something I do when it's quiet." "Can I ask what this story's about?" Lucas hesitated, then gave a small smile. "It's about a kid who doesn't have a superpower. Just good eyes. He sees things other people miss." Matthew nodded. "Sounds like a hero to me." Lucas looked down at his drawing. "He doesn't feel like one." "Sometimes heroes don't," Matthew said. "They just do the right thing anyway." Later that evening, Haley returned home and dragged Matthew into the living room to watch her rehearse a short scene for a school play. Lucas joined them on the couch, curling his knees to his chest, watching with a relaxed ease that was new. When the scene ended, Haley bowed dramatically, and Matthew clapped as if she were on Broadway. Lucas clapped too, smiling at her with genuine pride. Afterward, they had dinner, spaghetti, which ended in a minor noodle-throwing war between the kids. Matthew laughed, even as he wiped tomato sauce off his shirt. He hadn't remembered laughter feeling like this in a long time: easy, real, earned. That night, while tucking Lucas into bed, Matthew paused at the doorway. "Hey," he said, "about those drawings, if you ever want to do something more with them, like enter a contest or make a book, I'll help you. I mean it." Lucas's voice was quiet but firm. "Thanks. I might want to. Later." Matthew nodded. "Take your time." Lucas hesitated, then said, "I used to think families were just people you're stuck with. But this is different." Matthew stepped back in and sat on the edge of the bed. "How is it different?" Lucas looked at him, his voice barely above a whisper. "You chose me. You didn't have to. But you did." Matthew swallowed the lump in his throat and leaned forward, placing a hand gently over the blanket. "I'll choose you every day, Lucas. That's what family means." For the first time, Lucas reached out and held Matthew's hand in return. That night, the house felt warmer, even though the weather outside had turned cold. And somewhere down the hallway, in a quiet room that used to belong to no one, a boy who had spent far too long alone finally fell asleep without fear. It was early spring when the letter arrived. The trees outside the Carter home were just beginning to show hints of green, and the air had that soft warmth that made windows stay open a little longer and footsteps linger on porches. Haley had just returned from school and was bouncing through the hallway, already talking about a class field trip. Lucas trailed behind her, quieter but relaxed, his backpack slung over one shoulder, cheeks slightly flushed from the walk. Matthew was in the kitchen, sorting through the mail, half listening to their chatter when he came across the envelope. It was thin, plain, handwritten with no return address. The name on the front was simple: Lucas Carter. Matthew felt his chest tighten slightly. It was rare for Lucas to receive mail, and even rarer for it to come with no sender listed. He set it aside on the counter, unsure whether to give it to Lucas immediately or check its contents first. But something inside him, some growing trust, perhaps, told him to let the boy decide. Later that evening, after dinner and a short movie, Lucas noticed the envelope on the kitchen counter. He picked it up, turning it over in his hands like it was something delicate. Matthew watched from a respectful distance, waiting. "Can I open it?" Lucas asked quietly. "It's addressed to you," Matthew replied. "You don't need permission." Lucas sat down at the table, carefully tearing the flap. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded neatly. As he unfolded it, Matthew could see the subtle change in the boy's face: not alarm, not fear, but something more complex: recognition. Lucas read in silence for a long moment, then read it again. When he looked up, his eyes were glassy, but his mouth was curved in the faintest smile. "It's from someone who knew my mom," he said finally. His voice was calm but filled with something Matthew hadn't heard in it before: peace. "A woman she worked with at a diner a long time ago. She didn't know I was still alive until she saw a news article. She said my mom used to talk about me all the time." Matthew stepped closer, gently. "What did she say?" Lucas looked back down at the letter and read aloud, "She used to tell me, my son is special. One day someone will believe in him, and he'll do great things. He just needs someone to see him." The silence that followed was heavy with meaning. Matthew sat down across from him, watching as Lucas held the letter to his chest. It wasn't a long message, not dramatic or poetic, but it hit like thunder. The boy who had spent so long thinking he had been forgotten had just been reminded that someone, somewhere, had remembered him. And more importantly, that his mother had believed in him until the end. "Do you think she'd be proud of me?" Lucas asked quietly. Matthew didn't hesitate. "I think she'd be in awe of you." Lucas nodded slowly, folding the letter with care and slipping it into his notebook, between two blank pages he used for his drawings. Then he got up and walked over to Matthew, who stood as well, unsure if Lucas was about to leave the room or ask something else. Instead, the boy hugged him. It wasn't the careful, tentative hug of the past, or the spontaneous squeeze of gratitude from a child unsure of affection. It was a deliberate, full-hearted embrace, arms wrapped tightly around Matthew's middle, face pressed into his chest, breathing deep and steady. Matthew wrapped his arms around him in return, holding him just as tightly, aware of the significance of this simple act. Haley entered the kitchen a moment later and tilted her head at the sight of them. "Did I miss something?" she asked playfully. Lucas pulled back, wiping his face but smiling. "Just a letter." Haley, never one to be left out, walked over and hugged them both without asking for an explanation. And for a minute, they stood there, an unlikely family formed not by chance, but by choice, by the difficult, beautiful effort of staying when leaving would have been easier. That night, after the kids had gone to bed, Matthew sat alone in the living room with a cup of tea and thought about the letter. He thought about Lucas's mother, about how she must have clung to hope even as everything around her collapsed. He thought about the thousands of small decisions that had led them all here, to this house, this peace, this family. It hadn't been easy. None of it was. But he realized, in that still moment, that the best things in life rarely are. He got up, walked to Lucas's room, and peeked in. The boy was asleep, the letter still tucked into the notebook on his desk. Beside it, a new drawing, one Matthew hadn't seen before, lay half-finished. It was a picture of three people standing in front of a small house with a big tree. A man, a girl, and a boy. Above them, written in large, uneven letters, were the words, "We belong here." And for the first time in a long time, Matthew didn't feel like a man who had lost something. He felt like a man who had found exactly what he didn't know he was missing. By the time summer arrived, the Carter household had settled into something that felt less like a routine and more like a life. It was no longer remarkable that Lucas had his own toothbrush, his own drawer of socks, his own place at the table. It was no longer strange that his name was written on the side of his backpack, or that Haley introduced him without hesitation as her brother. These things had become normal, even mundane, and yet they carried a quiet power, the kind of power that comes from repetition, from security, from the daily choice to stay. Lucas had started calling Matthew Dad. There was no ceremony, no build-up. It happened one morning over cereal. He asked, "Dad, can we go to the park after lunch?" And Matthew's spoon froze midair before he looked up and simply answered, "Of course." That was it. No one spoke about it afterward, and no one needed to. The word fit. It felt earned, not given, and Lucas never took it for granted. One particular morning, Lucas was up earlier than usual. The house was quiet, sunlight filtering in through the kitchen windows, catching flecks of dust in the air. He sat at the counter with a piece of toast in one hand, the other busy flipping through a sketchbook full of characters he'd been creating for weeks. There were pages and pages of rough comic panels, a boy with a flashlight that never ran out of batteries, a girl who could fly but only when she was laughing, a dog that barked riddles. His imagination had opened like a window during a storm, and he was finally learning not to shut it again. Matthew entered the kitchen with a stack of mail and a cup of coffee, pausing when he saw Lucas already awake. "Early start?" he asked, leaning on the counter. Lucas shrugged with a small smile. "Couldn't sleep. Had an idea." Matthew nodded and glanced down at the sketchbook. "You ever think about showing these to someone? A publisher? A magazine?" Lucas hesitated. "They're just for fun." "They're more than that," Matthew said. "You have something here. Something real." Lucas looked down at the drawings again, this time with something more like belief in his eyes. He didn't answer, but he didn't dismiss it either. That afternoon, the three of them attended a local youth storytelling event at the community center. Haley had signed up to read one of her poems, and Lucas had quietly submitted a short comic script under a fake name, too nervous to claim it openly. The hall was filled with families, some big, some small, some loud, some cautious. It felt safe. Warm. The kind of space Lucas used to avoid but now found himself relaxing into, even enjoying. When Haley went up to the microphone, her voice shook at first, but then she found her rhythm. She read about stars and shadows and how sometimes, love sounds like footsteps that never leave. The room was silent, listening, and when she finished, the applause was genuine. Lucas clapped the loudest. A few speakers later, the coordinator read Lucas's comic aloud. The crowd laughed in all the right places and leaned forward during the quiet moments. When it ended, the room applauded again, and Lucas, though not named, looked around as if trying to hold the moment in his hands. Matthew leaned down and whispered, "Proud of you." Lucas didn't say anything, but his smile stretched wider than it had in days. As summer deepened, the family took a small vacation, a road trip upstate, just the three of them. They stayed in a cabin near a lake, roasted marshmallows, told ghost stories, and let their phones go dark for a few days. One night, sitting beneath a sky scattered with stars, Lucas asked Matthew, "Did you ever think this would happen?" Matthew, watching the fire crackle, replied, "Not once. But I'm glad it did." "Me too," Lucas said. I think Mom would be okay with this." Matthew looked at him, saw the honesty in his face, the vulnerability that had once been buried under fear and doubt. "I think she'd be more than okay," he said. "I think she'd be proud." Lucas didn't cry, but his eyes shimmered in the firelight, and he didn't look away. The final morning of the trip, Lucas woke up early and wandered down to the lake alone. The water was still, the mist rising like breath from the surface. He sat on a log near the shore, knees pulled to his chest, and let himself be quiet. Not because he was afraid, or sad, or planning his next move, but because he didn't need to run anymore. He belonged here, in this moment, in this life. Back at the cabin, Matthew and Haley were packing up, and when Lucas returned, he helped without being asked. They worked in easy silence, the way real families often do, not filling space with talk, but sharing it without hesitation. When they arrived back home later that day, Lucas walked through the front door and paused. The house smelled like them now. Like dinners cooked together, like laundry folded and left on the stairs, like the vanilla candle Haley insisted on lighting after school. He dropped his bag and stood still for a moment, letting the weight of home settle on his shoulders not as a burden, but as comfort. Matthew walked past him, ruffled his hair, and said, "Welcome back." Lucas looked up and answered, "It's good to be home." And it was. In every sense of the word.